All right. So,
Anyways, good tacos. Like we mentioned.
this is part two, by the way,
Right.
of our second.
And I had a thing that happened where I realized that individuals that I know well, I'll just put it that way, are reflect more narcissistic tendencies than I thought they did. I just had an example slap me around where, and this goes back to AI. My wife had taken some classes in AI, and then these individuals offered to pay for me to take the same classes. And at first I thought, okay, yeah, that's cool. And then I realized, hey, wait a minute. I've been talking about this stuff for over a year, and all of a sudden you're interested because you started using it, even though I've been talking to you guys about it over and over, and then it's only relevant now because you're interested. And so that just that narcissism, and then on top of which, there was an incident where they used some of the image creation through AI, and they'd only done one single picture, mind you, and it's still only done one single picture. That they're all woo woo woo. I've done over 100 videos. Each video has about 30 images in it.
Right.
And I've been doing this for a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And they're acting like, oh, look at this one picture. And I'm like, I've been doing this for all this time, and you not really said much, you know?
Right. Well, that's indicative of a certain level of narcissism. I think it's important to understand what narcissism is, and I think as more people are starting to get a clue, they're starting to recognize it more and more, not just on the individual level, but in cultural level, societal level, global level, and there's a spectrum for everything, and everybody's a narcissist to some degree. You just can't. You're a human being, so you're going to be, as long as you have any sort of ego. There's a certain level of narcissism. And then there's, the far end of the spectrum where you have the pathological narcissist and you have the malignant narcissist who does it on purpose just because they get off on it. Pathological may not necessarily mean. There's all kinds of different variations and ways you can dig into it. And then you don't know if they're being a narcissist or if they're actually just extremely traumatized and they're avoiding. But at the end of the day, this behavior is pretty similar and the same, and the consequences are equally the same. So, in your instance, once again, narcissism being that your world and what affects you and what's happening is the only reality, and that is it's the inability to envision or see somebody else's perspective or point of view at the to the extreme extent to where it's harmful. With that being said, I think that, like I said, there's a whole spectrum that people can be on in this regard. But it's far more common than people think because it's a cultural issue as well as the individual. So, in a society that like America, for example, in most Western societies, and especially in America, where it's this rugged individualist mentality, the colonialist, expansion. This holds true for Europe as well. Going into other countries, colonizing, exploiting the people there because they had manifest destiny. In America's case, that's what they defined it as. And that our religion, our way of life, our thing is cultural narcissism to an extreme degree, to a pathological degree almost, to where it was justified to literally, genocide an entire, indigenous population in the South Central and North America. So that's where it starts, And that narcissism, if you want to really take it back, starts in Abrahamic religion with, a sociopathic, narcissistic God who, most of the good portion of their commandments is about you must worship only me.
The first 5, I believe. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the 10 Commandments, I mean, people say, oh, the 10 Commandments are so great. Well, look at the first couple. The first couple have nothing to do with stealing, lying, anything like that. They're all, make sure that you recognize that God is great and all this weird crap. It's like, why would a God actually give it to you,
There's so much to unravel there, but if you start thinking about that, it's not even denying that there's other gods, so it's not even monotheistic the way people think it is. Because if you read, some of the Old Testament, He's not denying the existence of other gods. He's just saying, I'm the one. You can't worship any other, and if you don't worship it properly, I'll just murder everybody. I'll take you all out, and then make a rainbow and apologize like any good abuser would. So, yeah, it's this whole narcissistic sky daddy that they worship, and then that transcended and translated into cultural narcissism and individual narcissism is the end result. And for somebody who's under all this, it's a defense mechanism is to become a narcissist yourself. It's a way of protection of your own sense of identity, and then it just it's a continuing loop. And then certain individuals are starting to recognize what these behaviors look like, what the difference between abuse and reactionary abuse, which is, somebody does some harm to you and then you react back, and then they try to blame you for the harm they caused you because they said you're being violent and crazy, when all you're doing is reacting to their violence and crazy, and it's not the same thing. It's a completely different thing. But anyways, yeah, that goes back to this narcissism, that this whole culture, this whole society resides in narcissism. And the more that people start to recognize what that means and what that entails, I think we'll be able to get out of this cycle of abuse that's just been perpetrated for centuries, thousands of years. Anyways, yeah, it's a good topic, and I think that it's important for people to know what narcissism is, that everyone's narcissistic, to what degree. There's a certain level of selfishness that might be required for certain individuals, especially if they're in early parts of healing themselves and trying to discover who they are.
It's a little bit like sexism and racism, things like that. The healthy path is to recognize that we all are to some extent, and move from there. And if your first reaction is, "Oh, I'm not," then
then you're probably in
a
trouble.
problem.
Yeah, you're really in trouble, because everybody is, and will be, and I will be, and so will Alec at some point in your life. Again, even though I know it exists and I know it to look for, I'll still do it. Hopefully I'll recognize it and stop. But my point also is to recognize self-preservation and self-love and taking care of yourself and being selfish. And sometimes people get that confused as well. You got to take accountability for your behavior. You can't just always say, well, that's not my responsibility for how you feel. Well, if you're doing something wrong, then it is, to some extent. On the other hand, you do have to maintain your own peace, and sometimes that means saying no to somebody or not helping them because it's just, it's too, at that moment or that time, it's just not right for you. But every individual has to come to that conclusion on their own. I'm not going to give any advice on that, on when you should or shouldn't. That's up to you to decide. If something is disrupting your peace to such an extent, and you're not being selfish, or you're not in denial of your accountability and responsibility in a situation, but you just need to maintain your own peace, well, that's something different than being selfish. But it's really hard to know the difference sometimes.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we're going to go off on this tangent, but the obvious thing that we haven't said directly is that the current persons in charge of the country are kind of the extreme examples of what narcissism looks like. And
pathological and malignant on top of it.
Right. And so part of the problem with not being able to recognize narcissism is that if you can't recognize it at a lower level, then you're less likely to recognize it at a higher level and see those problems for what they are.
Right, and like I said, for individuals that have been conditioned, in Abrahamic religion or something, this makes perfect sense to them. They're in a trauma bond. They're in a trauma bond with a sadist, just like in their religion, just like probably in their family dynamic with the father, the whole patriarchy, the whole, hierarchical system that they're so used to, that the abuse seems normal to them, and then separating themselves outside of that and developing their own individuality is like completely a foreign idea for them. So, and I think if you look at most people that would vote for Trump that have been brainwashed in that regard, probably came from that a dynamic very similar to what I'm describing.
In most cases, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just generalizing here, but I would have to imagine that that's probably the case, and that's what I've noticed. It's usually people who have grown up in that kind of in a lot of cases, it's people from rural areas, or if they did have an education or anything like that, they had narcissistic parents, extremely narcissistic parents. And like I said, in a lot of cases, the narcissists themselves did that as a defense mechanism. It was a coping skill early in life just to survive, and they never expanded beyond it because it never really got them in enough trouble. Because unfortunately in our society, this type of narcissism, if it's not unchecked, is rewarded economically and in other ways. People actually will start to praise people for their narcissistic. I mean, I remember in the 80s?
Oh, well,
Shop until you die, and what was the other thing? No. Greed is good.
That was it.
You know, this Ayn Rand insanity, like, you know, the wet dream of 14-year-old boys.
I'll be honest, I latched onto it myself. That's why I voted Libertarian in, I think, 3 different elections, and I'm still kicking myself for not waking up earlier than I did, but, you know.
It was a progress, though, progression. I mean,
yeah.
At least you got away from something, got to libertarianism, like, okay, I need to be my own, and then you progress and more. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, just I think it was more latching onto the idea that third parties even meant anything, which now I'm at the point of it would be good if we had a society where it could, but we don't live in that
Not
world.
yet.
Not here in the U.S., no.
So to be pragmatic, yeah.
Right.
We're in a two-party system, and until we can get beyond that, that's what we're dealing with. Unless the whole thing crumbles and we have to start from
Which
scratch.
may happen sooner than we thought, but I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing at this point.
All right, this might be a good spot to
Yeah.
cut it off.
Right.
So we talked about cultural and individual narcissism and how it applies to politics. All right.